Good evening again, everyone. I'm delighted to be here on the RATPAC meeting tonight. The presentation is entitled Skywarn Spiders Past, Present, and Future. And I just want to say my interest in weather comes by naturally. My dad was a meteorologist with the National Weather Service. And when we were small, he would tell us children tornado stories and show us where to take shelter in the basement if a warning was issued. So we were doing, I guess, simulated emergency tests, SCTs, even as children. I had nightmares for tornadoes for years as a child, but those tornadoes have now been replaced by a healthy respect for the weather. In 1999, I attended my first Skywarn spotter training class. In 2005, the warning coordination meteorologist for the Raleigh National Weather Service asked me to become coordinator for Central Carolina Skywarn, and he wanted a 2-year commitment. I was a fairly new ham. I had been licensed in 2001 and upgraded to extra in 2004. But a 2-year commitment, I thought, ooh, that's a long time. But I accepted it, and I'm still here today. It's been 18 years today since serving in that role. I've taught Skywarn spotter classes for the last 13 years, and I find it very rewarding to make North Carolina a safer place to be by participating in Skywarn to support the National Weather Service. So moving on to slide 2. We're going to take a look at Skywarn tonight with a focus on past pivotal people and events. This will be very brief. Anytime you can cover 100 years or more, it has to be brief in this context. It'll be followed by some comments about the status of Skywarn today, and then the next 5 to 10 years, what to expect. Slide 3. We're going to start by looking at some early use of volunteer weather spotters or weather observers. I want to talk about Joseph Henry first. He was the first secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, and in 1847, he proposed a program. It was called the Smithsonian Institution Meteorological Project, and this program was to observe and report the weather. The next year, in 1848, he actually established a network of volunteer weather spotters across the country, and they sent in monthly reports to the Smithsonian by telegraph. And these reports would include such things as temperature, humidity, wind and cloud conditions, rain and snow measurements. That's by 1860, there were over 500 volunteer observers. And that same year, Henry decided to ask the public for eyewitness tornado reports. The public responded promptly and overwhelmingly. And by 1862, the Smithsonian published a circular about tornado dangers, and that was followed up by a pamphlet in 1872 about how to report tornadoes. It was an aid in reporting tornadoes. And he was interested in such things as the date, location, length and width of the path, direction, speed of movement, color of the sky, even the shape of the funnel. Next slide, please. As we move on, I wanted to highlight John Park Finley with the Army Signal Corps. He was an early meteorologist and researcher. And he was the first person to study tornadoes extensively. He collected all known tornado reports from old records from 1794 through 1881, and he republished a report in 1884 called The Character of 600 Tornadoes. This was the most comprehensive climatology of tornadoes set forth up to that time. Between 1883 and 1887, he organized a team of 2,300 tornado reporters to document observations of tornadoes and associated weather conditions. From that study of all these reports, he compiled a list of rules for tornado prediction, and he actually began issuing experimental tornado alerts in 1884. But those forecast alerts were stopped in 1886. And the question is why? So the next slide. The reason they stopped is because in 1887, Chief Signal Officer General Adolphus Greeley banned the word tornado in forecast. He thought the word tornado would cause panic. And so the word was banned. And forecasters, if you want to call them forecasters at this point, used the euphemisms such as severe local storm. And people considered it career suicide to use the word tornado. And so for decades, the weather reports ignored tornado, and that ban lasted 65 years. Next slide. Moving on to World War II, it was recognized that defense installation and war production centers, such as ammunition dumps and military supply depots, were very vulnerable to thunderstorms and tornadoes. And here's an example here. Fort Riley, Texas, was struck by a tornado, an F5, on May 15th, 1943. 41 buildings were destroyed. It included barracks, mess halls, and other buildings. There were 170 fatalities and 170 injured and 2 fatalities. Next slide. So because of the vulnerability of military installations, in 1942 and 43, the U.S. Weather Bureau, in cooperation with the military, set up networks of volunteer storm spotters, and their mission was to monitor lightning near ordnance facilities. They're going to alert ordnance plants of approaching lightning. And the mission expanded and grew to include other hazardous weather, including tornadoes. The value of real-time firsthand reports was recognized, and by 1945, there were more than 200 such military networks. And these were maintained after World War II because of the importance of these military installations. The origins of volunteer spotting predate this period, but the impetus for widespread encouragement and use of storm spotting is a result of concerns on part of the military in the war. Moving on. Forecasting history was made on March 25th, 1948. And this was the first tornado forecast and warning. This was issued by United States Air Force forecasters Ernest Fawbush and Robert Miller from Tinker Air Force Base. You can see their picture on the right-hand side. There's an interesting story here, and I'll share it real quick that relates to this. On March 20th, 1948, Miller was on duty at Tinker Air Force Base, and he issued a warning for the base to alert everyone that 35-mile-per-hour wind gusts were coming. But he didn't mention the possibility of thunderstorms. He thought it was going to be a pretty quiet evening, and so he settled back for an uneventful night. However, it was anything but quiet. By 9:30, thunderstorms were forming and in progress only 20 miles away, and by 9:52 p.m., thunderstorms had developed into a squall line. At this point, they were only 7 miles away from Tinker Air Force Base, and there was a message from Will Rogers Airport that there was heavy thunderstorm activity with winds gusting to 92 miles per hour, and at the end of the message, tornadoes south on the ground moving northeast. That was at 9:52 p.m. At 10 p.m., an F3 tornado touched down at Tinker Air Force Base, demolishing 52 aircraft. The day after this tornado struck, there was an investigative board that came to Tinker Air Force Base, and they wanted to investigate whether such an event could be predicted in the future. And their goal was to establish a severe weather safety plan. And remember, at this time, there was still a ban on issuing public forecasts and alerts. They declared it would not be forecastable given the nature of tornadoes, given the present state of the art. Well, Bush and Miller didn't have Doppler radar as we do today, satellites or computer forecast models, but they did have upper air observations collected by weather balloons. They also had surface observations from airports. So they analyzed the upper air and surface data from the previous tornado on March 20th and other tornado outbreaks. And something caught their eyes. They noticed many similarities in overall weather patterns associated with the tornado and other outbreaks. On the morning of March 25th, only 5 days after the F3 tornadoes had struck, weather charts were showing those same weather patterns as March 20th and with previous tornado outbreaks. And they came to a conclusion that central Oklahoma would be in a primary tornado threat area by late afternoon and early evening. They did not feel confident enough to issue a tornado forecast. No one had done it before, and the odds of two twisters striking the same area in 5 days were, as they said, infinitesimal. So they consulted Fred Borum, who was the commanding general of the Oklahoma City Air Material Area, and he arrived at Tinker Air Force Base to provide assistance. He listened to their observations and the similarities of weather pattern, and he asked what time would be most critical. They said there would be a window between 5 and 6 p.m. So Borum recommended that those two meteorologists issue a forecast of heavy thunderstorms during that period of time. And he told them, you're about to set a precedent. Well, a squall line did form that afternoon to the west of Oklahoma City, and it continued to move steadily toward Tinker Air Force Base. General Borum looked the meteorologist in the eyes and said, are you going to issue a tornado forecast? Bush and Miller were worried about a forecast bust, and they were also concerned their careers might be in jeopardy. But despite these risks, they composed and typed up a tornado watch. And it was passed to the base for dissemination at 2:50 p.m. Bush and Miller's forecast prompted the air base to move aircraft into hangars and base personnel and tower control personnel to places of relative safety. Shortly after 6 p.m. that evening, for the second time in 5 days, a destructive tornado struck Tinker Air Force Base, leaving it in shambles. Power lines were blown down. Debris was everywhere. Caused $6 million worth of damage. So America's first ever tornado forecast proved to be a success. So that's the backstory there. The United States Weather Service initiated its own public severe storm forecasting service in 1952. And that was the Severe Local Storms Weather Unit, renamed SAILS in 1953. Okay, moving on to the next one. Another pivotal moment in history was a tornado in Udall, Kansas, which struck May 25th, 1955. And in this tornado, there were 80 fatalities, or 20% of the town's population. 20%. Stats indicated that 250 people were injured, nearly 200 buildings were destroyed, more than 180 homes were damaged or destroyed. And this event was important because the Weather Bureau decided to train their own weather spotters, their own severe weather spotters. In 1956, they issued a handbook for spotters, the Severe Storm Reporting Handbook. 2 pictures. One shows the devastating Udall tornado damage where a man and a dog are inspecting the debris, and the other is the cover to the Severe Storm Reporting Handbook. This handbook provided information how to report severe weather, including tornadoes, how to recognize a tornado, and it included some safety rules. Next slide, please. On March 8th, 1959, the first spotter training course was held. This was in Willington, Kansas. 225 weather spotters were trained. And there was a follow-up publication to the earlier 1956 handbook. It looks like a tornado, an aid for distinguishing tornadoes from other cloud forms. It was an official Weather Bureau handbook for use by tornado network observers. Next slide. Now, this was the April 1965 Palm Sunday tornado outbreak, and this was a watershed event. 48 tornadoes raked Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio, resulting in 260 fatalities. And depending on which reference you consult, anywhere from 1,500 to 3,400 injuries. Because there were 17 F4 tornadoes that day, and so many fatalities, the National Weather Service, or actually the Weather Bureau at that time, formed a service assessment team. The team published their findings in a 64-page report. And most of these findings dramatically changed the way the Weather Bureau operated its warning program. Among the findings, the assessment recommended the expanded use of civil defense sirens for tornadoes, an increase in the number of weather radars in the Midwest, the use of FM radios to broadcast warnings, and this was the forerunner of NOAA All Hazards Weather Radio, and the formal implementation with more consistent use in the terminology tornado watch and tornado warning, and policies for the use of those words. And then there was one final recommendation, and that was to increase the number of trained weather spotters to report severe weather to the local office. Increase the number of trained weather spotters. Well, in 1965, Merle Ketchenmeister was employed at the NWS Toledo, Ohio weather office. He was an avid amateur radio operator, and when he saw the recommendation to increase the number of trained spotters, he organized the Tri-State Weather Network. It had a very successful first year and was said to have reduced the number of fatalities due to tornadoes, and others implemented the program nationwide, and it was called Skywarn. And that is the basis for the Skywarn program as we know it today. So although spotter reports were made prior to 1965, we now had a formal organization of a spotter network. The name Skywarn is credited to Merle Katchenmeister, and spotters now had a structure within which they could operate in collaboration with the National Weather Service. Okay, next slide, please. 1970s saw a NOAA pamphlet which provided information about thunderstorm hazards, the life cycle of a tornado, tornado lookalikes, and reporting procedures. And during the 1970s, amateurs were increasingly using repeaters and mobile radios to provide communications. New spotter networks were forming. And in 1986, there was the first MOU between the National Weather Service and the American Radio Relay League. Okay. Next slide, please. In the 1990s, 1990s, there was a new position at the National Weather Service created, and this was the Warning Coordination Meteorologist, or the WCM. And the WCM's position was one of responsibility for public outreach, and he acted as a liaison between emergency managers and spotter groups. He was to provide training to spotter groups, and spotter guides over this period of time continue to be updating, and you'll recognize in the center the Weather Spotters Field Guide. This is the most recent one of June 2011. Okay, moving on. This brings us to Skywarn today. There are 122 weather forecast offices across the United States, including Puerto Rico and Guam. Each one has a Skywarn program. Some are more active than others. There are over 350,000 trained volunteers nationally. And who are these folks? They include ham radio operators, emergency management officials, public safety folks, law enforcement, fire, EMS, COCORAS observers, cooperative network observers, and other concerned citizens. Spotters provide the vital ground truth reports of hazardous weather to help meteorologists issue, extend, or even cancel warnings. These reports enhance the situational awareness of local and state integrated warning teams. Integrated warning teams consist of emergency management, broadcast media core partners, the National Weather Service, and Skywarn, and all have the common goal of improving the warning system, reducing fatalities, and protecting or mitigating property damage. Okay, next slide. Each forecast office warning coordination meteorologist coordinates the local Skywarn program. And this person implements, manages, and administers the program. Basically, conducting and overseeing Skywarn spotter training, ensuring that Skywarn reports support local warning operations, promoting Skywarn with a website presence. Almost all NWS office web pages have a Skywarn web page, and they work with amateur radio operators. Okay, the next slide, please. Ironically, in doing this, I discovered there is no national training standard as of today. That's amazing to me. The local warning coordination meteorologist determines the curriculum, methods, and recognition process used in their county warning area. And they tailor it to the needs. Classes generally include the basics of thunderstorm development, fundamentals of storm structure, identifying potential severe weather features, information to report, how to report information, and basic severe weather safety. Okay. The warning coordination meteorologist can personally conduct Skywarn spotter classes, in-person classes, or he can train a knowledgeable designee to teach. This could be someone from emergency management. It could be another meteorologist. It could be even a Skywarn coordinator or someone else he feels comfortable with who is knowledgeable. He can choose to conduct website-based training, such as YouTube videos. He can use virtual training, such as video conferencing and webinars, and he can choose to accept Comet Med-Ed training. He can use that alone. He can use it in combination with his own local training or not at all. Next slide. The local WCM determines Skywarn weather spotting criteria and the reporting methods that will be used in his particular county warning area. And this makes sense. Think about the warning coordination in Idaho probably has a different list of winter weather criteria than the warning coordination meteorologist in Central North Carolina. Again, the criteria selected is tailored to the needs of the local county warning area. And here I've just put down an example. The National Weather Service in Raleigh asked for the following types of severe weather reports, and you can look at those very quickly. Okay, next slide. Spotters have lots of methods of reporting today, but not all these methods are available to every spotter, and that's partially dependent on the weather forecast office. They may have some limitation. There's NWS chat that requires an account. Telephone, certainly there is a telephone number given with spotter training for trained spotters. Texting is available if a line is set up for that. amateur radio, a local weather forecast office web-based forums. These reports tend to be received by the NWS very quickly. There's spotternetwork.org. Reports from the spotternetwork.org group are received by the NWS quickly, but not all weather forecast offices have their system set up to receive the reports. Members who participate in this have completed training. And then there's email. Email is great in that it allows for web links to be shared, photographs, videos, and even a very detailed description. However, a lot of times email is not monitored during an event, but it is consulted after an event, checked after an event. So email is better for sending information after the event. And of course, there's social media, which is rapidly growing in popularity, and perhaps in some ways, I think, overtaking reports by amateur radio. Social media allows for photographs, web links, and videos to be sent. There's also observation reporting apps, and one of those is MPing. This is a free app available for smartphones or mobile devices. MPing stands for Meteorological Phenomena Identification Near the Ground. And to use the app, reporters simply select the type of weather that is occurring, tap submit. There are a number of menu items, and MPing reports are immediately archived into a database at the University of Oklahoma and displayed on a map accessible to anyone. Many NWS forecast offices display the data on large monitors, and they use those reports to fine-tune their forecast. And of course, there's COCORAS. Some of you may be members of the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. Hail reports of hail, snow, and heavy rainfall information entered into COCORAS is automatically sent to the National Weather Service. Okay, moving on to the next slide. I contacted 5 different National Weather Service meteorologists. 4 were warning coordination meteorologists. 1 was a former warning coordination meteorologist, but now the meteorologist in charge. And all talked about social media, and they said reporting methods change as communication technology changes. And by the way, these meteorologists were from North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Idaho, and Nebraska. With regard to social media, one person, one MIC, the MIC shared an interesting story. I'm going to read his comment. Just a week ago, we were working within the Virginia Beach Unified Command with emergency managers when the EF3 tornado hit. Within minutes, we were pulling up pictures of the tornado on Twitter, including pictures showing the severity of the damage, allowing us to quickly ascertain the seriousness of the situation in near real time. Of course, this doesn't happen all the time like this, but it's a great example of how fast social media can respond and provide intelligence. So, the social media is definitely increasing in use. Almost all meteorologists consulted mentioned, though, that reports from social media have to be carefully vetted. Offices indicate they still receive too many bogus reports, bogus photos, and exaggerated reports. NWS Chat 2.0 is coming. NWS Chat 2 is moving to a new platform. It will be on a new platform. It'll be on Slack, which is a secure, reliable platform, and it will offer features such as photo and video sharing, cross-device compatibility, and photo and video sharing was not possible with the current NWS Chat. NWS Chat 2 will go live in September of 2023. The next one was Moorhead Controls operating outside the NWS office in the next 5 to 10 years. during the I'll say COVID scare, 'cause COVID is just still around, but during the COVID, I guess more isolation days, net controls could not go into NWS offices, and so they operated from home. And it was very convenient, worked out well. And so some offices see this continuing, others are using a hybrid combination. Yes, they will be operating some from home, but for more serious events, they will be at the NWS office. Um, there will be greater flexibility in Skywarn training opportunities. There'll be both virtual and in-person classes, and one office indicated they're definitely going to be looking at different times of the day to accommodate different schedules. All of them indicated the need for volunteers to be force multipliers by spreading the word of hazardous weather preparedness and safety through Skywarn and Weather Ready Nation Ambassador Program. And many Skywarn groups and ham groups are Weather Ready Nation ambassadors. They hope that more will become so. Some NWS offices have a well-developed Weather Ready Nation ambassador program. Others are still getting it off the ground. Okay, moving on to slide 21. All has indicated there will be a continued need for amateur radio when all other means for communications have been compromised. Many NWS offices, in addition to VHF and UHF equipment, have HF equipment and are trying to be prepared for that day when it does happen. And then last of all, the core role of the Skywarn spotter will not change. All agree nothing can replace the value of an accurate ground truth report from the eyes of a trained spotter. Okay, the next slide. I just want to share one story before I comment on this last slide. Central Carolina Skywarn has been very rewarding, and I wanted to share with you one incident that occurred on April 16th, 2011. This was the day that North Carolina experienced 30 tornadoes. Our yearly climatology indicates 30 tornadoes for the year. This was 30 tornadoes in one day. Skywarn was obviously very active. There were two incidents. One where was a spotter who was traveling from Virginia to his home in Harnett County, North Carolina, and every 20 to 30 minutes he would provide a report of damage because there were so many tornadoes. He would report, houses severely damaged here, multiple trees down, etc. As he got closer to his home, he disappeared from the air for quite a bit of time. I was concerned and hope he made it home safely. He did call in to the Skywarn net. He says, "I want you to know I made it home." He says, "Only I have no home. I don't have a home anymore. It's gone." And he sent me pictures the next day of a dormer from the house laying in a farm field and part of a back wall of the house standing, and that was it. And that was pretty heartbreaking. Also during that day, we had a report of a tornado that had just taken out the Lowe's in Sanford, North Carolina, and was traveling toward Raleigh. And at one point, we had a report of someone saying there was some debris flying in the air. And he says, "I don't know whether that means anything." I said, "What do you mean by debris?" And he said, "Well, it's things like shingles and siding and insulation." So I relayed that to the meteorologist in charge, and he looked at the radar and he says, "Wow." He says, "My house is very close to there." Then in a few minutes, he says, "How soon would it take you to find two more Skywarn net controls?" And I said, 30 seconds, sir. And we had to evacuate the NWS forecasting offices because we were in the path of the tornado. We went down to the tornado shelter, which was first floor of the building and underneath the stairwell for 10 minutes. Blacksburg NWS office took over for the Raleigh National Weather Service issuing warnings. I had two Skywarn net controls who were on standby, not in the path of the tornado. They took over. When after about 10 minutes, we came out, we opened the door, and you could smell the scent of pine trees that had been snapped by the tornado going through downtown Raleigh. Fortunately, we were less than 2 miles away from the tornado. We went back to taking reports. We took 96 different reports that day from 57 different spotters. And a number of people told me that they listened and they knew when to take cover because we were sharing the forecast tornado warnings as they were issued. And again, that story to me just highlights the fact that when you participate in Skywarn, you do support their mission of protecting life and property. You make your community a safer place to be. I want to conclude with this slide because I mentioned my father at the beginning. He was the inspiration for this presentation. He received his weather training, observer training in World War II with the Army Air Force, and he later worked for the National Weather Service. And so the first picture you see is at the beginning of his weather career, and the latter picture is pretty close to his retirement time. So anyway, that's my presentation for tonight. Thank you so much for allowing me to share this with you and my thoughts, and I would be happy to entertain any questions.
I have a comment, please.
Go ahead.
Okay. One of the things mentioned, although it's not mentioned a lot of times, is radar is a straight line service. When an pulses come out of a radar dish, they go in a straight line. They don't curve with the earth like most radio signals do. The farther away you are from the radar, the more there is between the radar beam and the ground. It's so critical to have eyes on the ground a little bit further away from the radar sites. For example, where I live, we're in between the Melbourne, Florida, and the Miami, Florida National Weather Service offices. A lot of times they can't see what's happening on the ground. We could have a tornado on the ground and the radars won't see it because the radars are aimed. They try to get them as close to the ground as they can, but the Weather Service depends on us. And it's not just us, it's trained people that know what they're doing. Because when we run Skywarn nets, we get all kinds of strange observations. And then the net controls have to know the people, and when they identify as an NWS trained Skywarn spotter, they know that when they're operating and they're reporting something, they pretty much know what they're talking about. So radar in a lot of cases is blind. And everybody says, oh, they don't need human observations anymore. We have all of these machines. Can't beat the human eyeball. And Weather Service, that's why the Weather Service loves us, because they would be blind without a lot of these Skywarn spotters. Back to you, Virginia.
Okay, great comments. Thank you so much. And yes, the higher the beam travels and the further away the radar beam travels, the lower the resolution. And a trained spotter's report carries more credibility generally than the untrained spotter. So great comments. Thank you for sharing. Any other comments or questions?
Yes, Gene from Colleen.
Hey, Gene, go ahead.
Yeah, is there any application that will allow a storm spotter or anybody really to take a video as a storm is approaching in real time and forward it to the appropriate agency in real time at the same time? I don't know if that's confusing, but that's my question.
I do not know the answer to that. Is there someone else who does?
Once the new chat comes around, there will be ability, I hope, to be able to upload videos to that. Right now, no.
That is correct. The new NWS Chat 2.0 will allow for the ability to upload videos and photos.
Here we go. We got a hand.
We do. Roy, take it away.
Hi there. I just want to the idea of ham radio being the communications of last resort is not theoretical. I was involved in Skywarn in the 70s in Milwaukee, and a small line came through, knocked the big glass window out of the weather service, knocked over their 8-foot rack cabinet, and wiped out all of their equipment, including all their teletypes. So the very next time I was down there at the weather service with my Motorola HT100, and we were in the basement. I was holding that HT over my head as the only communication with the National Weather Service for about an hour. So we do serve a purpose, even with the least amount of equipment possible.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I know most of us here are very much pro MCOM, and I've always thought that the best MCOM folks are those that are weather aware and have been trained as spotters. I see that Doug N3 LTV in Raleigh posted a question. He says, has there been an increase in the number of Skywarn spotters in the Raleigh or Wake County area or North Carolina area? I can speak for Central North Carolina for the Raleigh National Weather Service. We are now up to 3,000 spotters in 31 counties, which is a fairly good sized number. Of that 3,000, roughly 25% or 750 of those are amateur radio operators. So the vast majority are non-hams in comparison. I don't know whether that holds true across the country or not, Doug, but I hope that answers your question. In Central North Carolina and 31 counties that the Raleigh National Weather Service is responsible for, the majority of the reports come from PSAP centers, 911 centers. Most of those folks have been trained. Amateur radio used to have a lot more, I would say, reports 15 to 20 years ago. But at that point in time, you had telephone, you had amateur radio. You didn't have near the number of methods of reporting that are available today, and that in some ways are even more convenient. The biggest concern that I have is when severe weather occurs, is that somebody says, someone else will report this. And if everybody says somebody else is going to, usually, oftentimes it ends up nobody reports it. So I would encourage all of you to do that. And let's see, there was one other question here. I saw someone asked, does our NWS publish local guides with emergency numbers? And whenever a spotter class is offered, the National Weather Service does give a handout which provides the criteria, reporting methods. It also has a confidential telephone number for which trained spotters can call to make their reports. That number is not published. It's just for trained spotters. So I hope that answers your question, Barry. Okay, I see two more.
We had a very, very nice, each county, our local NWS publishes a laminated sheet that gives all of the local sheriff's office numbers, all the fire department numbers, the regular telephone numbers, not the 911 ones, along with all of that. And I just can't find it right now to send to everybody, so I'll probably have to find it later and send it out to the mailing list.
Okay, we got a couple more hands up here. You got your hand up again, Gene. Go ahead.
Yeah, just one more question. There are a lot of home weather stations out there that you can purchase, set up outside your house. What key specifications should I look for in determining how accurate it is compared to the weather station at the Army Airfield, which is about 2 miles line of sight from me.
Let me see if I'm going to call on Bob WX4MMM in just a moment. He is an assistant or emergency coordinator for Central Carolina Skywarn, and he has a degree in meteorology, and he can probably speak more about weather stations. I can tell you that some offices will even help. I have had someone offer to help me adjust my equipment. I used to have a Davis weather Vantage Pro 2 weather station. I'm getting ready to buy another. I'll tell you what not to use. We had a report one time of a wind speed around, I think it was 72 miles per hour, that would definitely qualify as severe. But there wasn't even a severe thunderstorm warning. And I knew this person had a Davis weather station. So I didn't drop the report in NWS chat. I called the National Weather Service office and I said, I'm not sure about this, but the person has a weather station and Davis Vantage Pro 2 is great. And they said, ask him, what do you get that off that? And so I called the amateur radio operator back and asked, and he says, oh no, I have a cell phone which has an app that you hold up in the air and it measures wind speed. So anyway, we made sure we disseminated the words to all net controls. No app on a cell phone can really adequately measure wind speed. I don't even have the technology on that worked. But that's something you don't want to use. Let me call on WX4MMM. Bob, would you mind commenting on that gentleman's question?
Virginia, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, that's a good question. I probably have 3 or 4 weather stations, and all of them have a little bit of difference. Of course, when I buy a weather station, I look at the specifications on it, the accuracy. I always look for like the temperature to be plus or minus 1 degree Fahrenheit. And of course, wind speed is very difficult, as Virginia pointed out, to measure because the standard height is 33 feet. But most folks have trees in their yard or something like that. So it's hard to even get a good accurate wind speed unless you live in a farm and just no trees at all. The weather service in Raleigh, the readings in Raleigh are out of the airport, which is probably about 12 miles from my house. And I don't think their readings are correct personally because their instruments are on the runway area, and I think they have some heat effects. So it's the best you can do. You can Google how to set up weather instruments. You can go to the CWOP website, and they have a lot of information how to properly set up your weather station. But again, when you buy a weather station, I guess in theory, what you pay for is what you get on accuracy. But I do look at the specifications when I'm buying one, and also how fast is it update? Does the temperature update every 2 or 3 seconds, or is it 30 seconds or so forth? So there's lots of factors. And of course, is your weather shelter located over a grassy location, or is it over near concrete or whatever? It's hard to get. It's no magic number. Of course, that's why there's so many weather stations around there, because you do expect some variability of your location due to no difference in heating, and again, the soil and all that affects your temperature. So I don't have an answer, but the best thing to do is look at the box or the instruments and see what the accuracy is when you're buying one. And wish you luck. Again, the Kokoross rain gauges are pretty good. I've been pleased with that. But I've got some electronic rain gauges, so I'm not too thrilled about them. It seems like they certainly do not do well in heavy rainfall. They can't keep up the rainfall. So the old Kokoross rain gauge is great, and Davis is a good instrument. I've got one as well, and I think that's probably as accurate as you can find. I don't work for Davis. I'll clarify that I don't work for Davis Instrument or anything, but they seem to be a fine instrument as well. So can't give you your particular answer, but there should be some variability. But obviously, if you're 4 or 5 degrees off from the weather service, then you may want to check how your exposure is. But if you go to that CWOP webpage, they give a lot of information about setting up your weather station. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Bob. I see Dennis W7DKL has his hand up.
Yes, hi. I'm located in Idaho, and we don't have a whole lot of severe weather here. We do have thunderstorms periodically. Tornadoes are really, really rare. So there's a lot of apathy from, trying to get a weather spotter program active. We're in the midst of trying to get a net established and things, but it's difficult because, I mean, it's good and bad. We don't have a lot of severe weather, but do you have any input on what could build a fire under some of the hams?
Um, I'm not sure. I'd have to ponder that one for a while. I know generally talking it up at ham radio club meetings and offering training. When I first became emergency coordinator, I contacted every club and the 18 counties that I was responsible for. And that's a lot of clubs. Central North Carolina, Raleigh area is Wake County alone has a number of clubs, and went to all of those and did a Skywarn presentation. I think that helps, but I think it's a slow process. But the more things that you do, the more the process builds. And having a warning coordination meteorologist who is a ham is great too, and who is very supportive of amateur radio operators. Um, I would say as much publicity as you can give it, the better off you are. Um, what kind of hazardous weather do you experience the most?
Well, probably thunderstorms, or winter storms periodically, but probably the biggest hazard would be thunderstorms. I would say in our area, and we don't have the huge amount of rainfall that you do in the South either. If we get an inch of rain, that's a lot here. So it's a different model, and so trying
Right.
to keep people excited about being involved. We did have a presentation of one of the ham clubs recently. They did a weather spotter training at the ham club and trying to get a network set up. But like you say, I think it's just a slow process. So hopefully it'll come in time.
The best thing to do is contact the warning coordination meteorologist and see what's already happening and ask, is there any way that you can help with that? Um, I always recommend doing things with the blessing of the National Weather Service so that they endorse you. And I'm not sure where you are exactly in Idaho, but I know that Pocatello, Idaho, um, Kevin Smith is the warning coordination meteorologist there, and he started with very little. The Skywarn program had been pretty much inactive for a number of years, and he arrived there 4 or 5 years ago. And somewhere during that time, he decided to really push, and he has done so and reached out and encouraged various different groups, not just ham radio operators, but certainly others and ordinary citizens, and has really grown the program. So if you live in Pocatello, Idaho, I encourage you to contact Kevin Smith at the National Weather Service office.
Yeah, I'm located in Boise and work with Jay Breidenbach here in Troy and some of the office. But I think COVID also had a huge impact. We were getting some momentum, and COVID kind of put a stop to all the training. So I think that was one of the big issues too that caused problems.
I have definitely made one observation. In North Carolina, we have hurricanes, we have tornadoes, we have severe thunderstorms. We have a hurricane to make landfall in North Carolina about every 3 to 4 years. And then a number of the others that don't make landfall in North Carolina make landfall somewhere else and then pass through North Carolina. At one time, the statistics were something like 1 out of every 7 tropical systems made their way through North Carolina. But I noticed that right after a severe weather event or after a hurricane, a tornado, interest is very high in Skywarn. And then when you have a period of calm, it's like people, don't check into the net as much or whatever. But you get another event and boom, they are there. So I no longer worry as much about periods of calm when we don't have as many people checking in, because when the severe weather hits, they're there. That would be my last comment on that. Bob, anything else, WX4MMM, you want to add on that?
Well, you're correct on that. We have a lot of crickets when it's pretty quiet, but when activity, that's a good time to talk it up. And again, the warning coordination meteorologist, you're right. That's where you need to go first. And hopefully your warning coordination meteorologist is a ham radio operator on top of it. I know, so you mentioned Kevin Smith, and of course he started down here in Raleigh, and he's a ham radio operator. I think you had some good points on doing that, and like I said, talk it up at the club meetings. I don't have much to add on that, and we have a few areas that we don't have Skywarn coverage either. But thanks to under Virginia's leadership, we got a great program up here in the Raleigh area. Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you, Bob. Any other questions or comments? It's 10 o'clock, so last comments.
I posted in chat the Beaufort wind scale, so it tells you, using your words and using your eyes, how to estimate your wind speed based on what's happening. That what you can see.
Thank you.
Actually, I think they have wind gauges that you can hook up to your cell phone and hold it up, but it's still not high enough to technically measure the wind speed.
Okay, Barry, how we looking in the chat there?
We're good in chat. Brett just held up one.
Yeah, guys, that's what I use to go outside in the street. Where I am in London, it's fairly windy. I am the Skywarn coordinator and controller for this area, and I cover 60-mile range in a circle. But it does come very handy. But I've really enjoyed being that position since 1996, and it's been very informative. And we do have Skywarn training here at least once a year, twice, once in May, once in June, and also then they have a Q&A in July to get everybody time to think about their questions. And it's quite well done by Jeff Colson, who is out of Toronto, which is 120 miles west or east of me. But we use mostly the U.S. Radar because it tells me what's coming in as best as it can. So, but we do have a lot of weather spotters between London and Sarnia, and also London and Windsor, Detroit area. And we also use the DMR and D-Star situation to make sure we have communications. So it's the repeaters are there, but the DMR and D-Star seem to be very well used, and we get the best of coverage of that. But Virginia, I thank you for your the night here. It was quite interesting and very informative, and I hope everybody has a safe week, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody on possibly next Wednesday. Thanks so much, Virginia. Take care.
Thank you, and congratulations on 27 years of service to Skywarn. That's great.
Okay, are there any more questions? I don't see hands up. I haven't seen anything pop up in chat, but I want to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, unless we got some more, we'll start wrapping it up here. Virginia, it's been a great presentation. I appreciate you coming on and doing this. I hope to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. It really has.